Ladies and gentlemen, we have with us today Mr. Dennis Myers. They always like to clap for a really long time, but I don't know if you yet deserve a really long clap. Maybe we'll give you a long clap at the end. We'll see. All right, Dennis, thanks for coming on tonight. Why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself? Where you from? What do you like to do? Who is Dennis?
I grew up in the upper Midwest, Minnesota, joined the Navy, and turned 20 in boot camp. Spent 10 years in the Navy going up and down the East Coast. And when I got out, I settled in Virginia because that's where my ex wife and my children were. I ended up in Richmond, Virginia. I'm a software developer with my second wife, who is wonderful. Um, and after the kids were grown and gone, I finally got the opportunity to sit down and start writing. Um, Over the years, I had always jotted down notes and story ideas and lots of little things everywhere. And I have a cousin who's also a writer who suggested that I put everything onto one timeline. And I ended up with about 4,000 years of history sketched out. So when the opportunity came for me to actually sit down and write for a few months, the story that was randomly selected, like I said, I'm a software developer. I made a random generator to do it. But the story that came out was right at the point where this thing called the Corporate Federation ended and the automated empire started. And I realized I had an origin story here to write. And what had been planned for 3 books turned into 4. So I've got a 4-book series that's coming out every 5 weeks through the end of the year.
Awesome. And what's the approximate word count for each of these?
They're all in the 100,000 word range.
Okay.
The third book is a little bit shy, like 95,000, but then the fourth book is like 108. So,
Makes up for it.
uh,
Okay, cool, awesome. Well, real quick, I wanted to touch on something you were just talking about, which was putting off writing until you've retired and you have the time. Obviously, I'm sure you found plenty of joy in it if you've pumped out 4 books, and I actually get that from a lot of people. They're like, kids got in the way and career got in the way, and I ended up moving 4 times, and I changed jobs, and all the different things get in the way of writing, which I feel like is a lot of people's maybe true love. So, do you wish that you started earlier, or are you happy that you're now in a place in your life where things have kind of settled down and you can think and ruminate on it more?
well, it's a mixed bag. I mean, I did do some writing when I was in my 30s, and I look back at it now, and I like the dialogue, but some of the other pieces don't work as well, and I want to go back and rewrite it. But yeah, I do wish I'd started sooner. I kept on getting this idea in my head that I would be in business or I would make enough money so that I could take time off to write because I knew writers don't make a lot of money. So I thought that's what it was going to take. And well, finally, in 2017, I got laid off. And in the process of getting laid off, I got a severance package that was based on my age. Guess what? I'm old enough that I had months where I didn't have to work. And of course, my lovely wife was very supportive. So I put together that random generator thing, popped out the story, and I sat down and I cranked out the first 2 books. I've been writing
Awesome.
ever since. I've actually written 5 books now. The first, oh, six, 6 books. These first 4, the first book of a second series that I'm back working on now, and then a third series that's sort of a prequel. I wrote the first one of those and sent that off to a different publisher. We'll hear back from him soon.
Yeah, well, not everyone is fortunate enough to get laid off from their job and, have a few months to write. So,
No,
to those people, what would you say? Would you say put it off until you have some more life experience and wisdom, or would you say just go for it?
I would say get started now. Um, there are some remarkable people who are writing, who are young and full of energy, and they're writing great stories. If you've got if you have the bug where you want to be a writer, get started now. Um, I find that if I just write for an hour in the evening after work, then I can build a story and I can write a book that way. Of course, I also put in some time on the weekends. So
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I think putting in the time is definitely something that you need to do in order to a refine your craft, but also I feel like artists have this bug inside of them that they have to get out. Like we have these things we have to say, and it does no good to just let it sit there and stew inside of you. Just share it with the world, and maybe the world will be a better place for it.
absolutely, absolutely. One thing that I found that really helped me was going to the small science fiction and fantasy conventions in the area and meeting authors just like me who are out there writing their books and doing their things. And there's some amazing people there, and they're all willing to help you and give you advice and show you what needs to be done. So I
You know,
would
that
highly
that's
recommend.
awesome that you bring that up. I've actually never been to a convention, which is terrible for a nerd to say. Like I should have been to so many different conventions by now.
You're in
Um,
North Carolina, aren't you?
I am. I'm in Asheville, so I was gonna ask.
Con-
You said that you have some in the area. Like, hit me up with some.
Congregate is in Winston-Salem. Con Carolinas is down, I think, in Charlottesville. Those are two that I love to go to.
Okay.
There's Fantasy, I think. I'm not sure where that one is. Yeah, North Carolina is a hotbed. There's my publisher's out of North Carolina, and the other publisher that I submitted to is also North Carolina.
Okay. Well, let's definitely talk about your publishing towards the end of this. One more
Okay.
quick question about the cons though. Do you go as a creator or as a consumer?
I have been going as a consumer. I did get invited a couple of years back because of my history. I used to write for Challenge magazine. Do you know Challenge Traveler?
I don't know.
It's a role playing game that started in the 70s, and I was
Okay.
writing for Challenge in the 90s, and that got me an occasional con appearance. But mostly, I've been just going as a paid guest, a paid attendee. Um, my first appearance as a guest is RavenCon in April in Glen Ellen. That's my hometown right now.
Okay. Awesome. Well, yeah, I'll have to check those out. Maybe I'll come and get you to sign one of your books for me or something. Speaking of your book, Rise of the Automated Empire: Final Assembly. Why don't you go ahead and show me that cover again? Because that was some beautiful cover art. How did you design this? Did your publisher put this together? Walk me through the cover a little bit.
The publisher took my description of a specific scene in the book and gave it to the artist. And the artist didn't exactly follow what I said, which is awesome because if he'd done what I said and if he depicted what the scene really looks like in the book, it would look like a fantasy novel. Okay. She's on the moon and she's going to a dome where it's pressurized and it's like a theme park, a fantasy theme park where people put on wings and they fly. But it's a science fiction setting because it's all automated things and artificial stuff. Um, yeah, but I love
Okay.
the cover.
Now, you said it might be misconstrued as a fantasy. Would you say that your series is strictly science fiction, or would you say that there's fantasy elements interwoven?
Um, it's my belief that people are going to take their fantasy with them. If you've ever played D&D or you watched Game of Thrones or anything like that, these fantasies are going to come with us. And the theme park that she goes to is a fantasy theme park. It is there for fun. Body modifications are very easy to get. So a lot of people have their ears pointed. Most of them are elves, might be an occasional Vulcan, I don't know. But that kind of thing is just very common. But it's a science fiction setting.
Got it. So, what exactly is the automated empire?
Well, um, that is something that grows throughout the four books of the series. and I really don't want to spoil it. All I can say is that Final Assembly is one of those titles that has more than one meaning. And near the end of the first book, they create something which is going to be a heavy factor in the rest of the series. Um, it's kind of like the Roman Empire. You know how they transitioned from Caesar, but he wasn't the first emperor, and then they had Augustus, and they had that triumvirate for a while. But they never called themselves the Roman Empire. It was still the Roman Republic to them. Um, this is kind of like that transition. And what I say is this is the beginning of what historians will label the automated empire. And
Okay,
like I said,
got it.
I have 4,000
So,
years.
so yeah. Obviously, due to Star Wars, whenever you hear the Empire, you think of a malicious entity. Would you say that the automated empire is a malicious entity?
I would say it depends on what era you're looking at
Hmm.
and what side you're on.
Hmm.
And I do plan on playing with that.
Interesting. Yeah, I think that's really good that authors are doing that. I know a lot of stories have like there is good and evil, there is black and white, but I like a little bit of ambiguity in it. Like in some of my own writing, I have different perspectives of different characters who are experiencing the same event, and you get to see the scene through each of their eyes. It's the exact same scene, and to one of them it's positive, and to one of them it's negative. So you really have to decide as an author whose side of a character are you taking, and then as a reader you also have to decide who's the good guy and who's the bad guy, or are there even good and bad guys? Do they both suck?
Yeah. In the first book, I can say that there is a bad guy because there's a serial killer. He's a bad guy. But I also have an antagonist, different character. He is the second most powerful person in the second most powerful corporation of the corporate federation. And he's ambitious, self centered, narcissistic, and greedy. Does
Talking
that make
about me?
does that make him a bad guy? Well, it depends on what side you're on. Um, you know, but I also show that he is a grandfather and wants to build he wants to build what could be described as an empire for his grandchildren. So,
Okay. Are you well here, let me read this quote that you had on your website. You said the automated empire's history spans thousands of years. So, before we get into a two-part question I have about that, have you read Asimov's Foundation trilogy?
oh yeah, I've read all of Asimov's Foundation Universe books, starting with Caves of Steel, all the way to whatever the last one was.
Okay, well you're probably more well versed in it than I am because I read the trilogy in college many years ago, and I need to pick it up again because I just remember it was amazing. But he writes about Foundation in the Foundation universe. Rather, it spans thousands of years. How did you go about world building this, and how do your characters interact across the timelines? You do like he did, and you kind of, from what I recall, he kind of just focused on certain segments across this, 1,000-year timeline or whatever it was. Or do you have characters that are maybe so long lived that they experience all of it? Walk me through that.
Um, I have one character that will appear frequently throughout the series. And again, that's near the end of this book, that character comes into being. But there are, well, my plan is to have a series of series. Like this 4 book series ends at book 4. The next series I'm working on takes place almost a decade later. Some of the characters originate in the first series, but they're reintroduced, and somebody coming along and just picking up that second series can start without a problem and then go back and read the first one and learn new things. So as I go through this, I want to tell these different stories as this political entity grows and changes and then gets to its final crux, which I lovingly call the fully automated empire. Um, that's when the fun starts. And I've even mapped out a series for fall of the automated empire a few thousand years down the line.
Okay, got it. Um, so you had mentioned we kind of briefly talked about this at the beginning of the podcast, but you had this idea, or many ideas that you spit into this random generator. How did you start world building this? Because it's a long task, I'm sure, to come up with ideas for a universe that spans thousands and thousands of years. Walk me through that.
Yeah, it started when I was 17 years old. You remember when you were 17? It wasn't that long ago for you.
For me, I mean, it was a while ago, and ironically, I actually came up with the idea for my first book when I was 17, so it must be a good number.
Yeah, I started reading this book that my mother had bought me by an author who I won't name, and I had such a reaction to it. I thought it was such trash. Like I didn't like it. And being 17, you're kind of full of yourself. You're like, I can do better than that. And so that's when I started out mapping my first story. Now that one didn't go anywhere, but I never stopped thinking about it and kept on writing down. I kept journals. I wrote notes and compiled them into notebooks. And most of these stories were around the same themes, different points in technology. And when I put them onto this timeline, most of them fit into the timeline in one of several places. Um, so there's a couple that didn't fit in, and mostly that's because um, they use like artificial gravity, which I don't use. This universe does not use, gravity plates or anything like that. You're spinning around, or you're on a body that's big. Um, yeah, so it's been many years. I'm 60 now, and I started this when I was 17. So it's been a lot of building and a lot of putting things together. But then when I sat down to actually write it, when I sat down and started putting these characters in place, they built themselves. They would have a conversation and they would drop a line about something they once did, and suddenly, well, now I know something new about this character because they're telling the story themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. I get that too, especially as a writer. Like, I'll start out with a character that has some traits in my mind, and then I'll write something and they'll make a decision that I didn't quite expect and opens up this whole new realm of possibilities for their reactions to other things that happen in the future or their reactions with certain characters. And you really are building these relationships that these characters have with each other and in relation to the world as well as you go along. It's not like everything that you have is set in stone. Like I know a lot of people, like I can't do this, but a lot of people they'll write out like an entire timeline and then all their character relations ahead of time and then everything. And I'm just like, no, it has to develop naturally. You have to see what comes to fruition as you're writing.
Do you know Christopher Rocchio?
I do not.
He writes the Sun Eater series. Starts with The Empire of Silence, Howling Dark. It's like a 7-book series that he's been working on. He's one of those younger authors I told you about. He sits down and he'll put together like a 30,000 page or a 30,000 word outline, and he'll follow that outline, and he just cranks out just some awesome material. I sat down once and I put together an outline for this story, and I outlined it and I got it all done. It wasn't even that long of an outline, but then I knew enough of the story that it wasn't interesting to me anymore, and I haven't written that book. So I'm a pantser. I'll have a general idea of what needs to happen in the book, where things are going, and have an idea of where the story needs to flow and how the various viewpoint characters need to interact. But that's it. Then I'll just sit down and see what happens.
Yeah. No, I'm very similar. I cannot do a detailed outline, but I will make like a beginning, a middle, and an end, and a few plot points in the middle, and I'll just make sure I hit all those and meander along to make sure I do that. But as long as I do that, I'm happy by the end. All right. So let's go to your publishing for a minute. So who's your publisher? You're not self-published, right? You went with a publishing house?
No, I went with Chris Kennedy Publications. Um,
Okay.
I met Chris at one of the conventions that I was at earlier this year, actually. MarsCon down in Virginia Beach. Had a conversation with him. He was actually recommended to me by an author who's somebody that I've met and spoken with before by the name of Chuck Gannon. Do you know Chuck Gannon? Um, he writes he writes some amazing science fiction as well. In any case, he had recommended Chris Kennedy because Chris publishes some of his other stuff. Most of Chuck's stuff is out of Baen, and then Chris publishes a lot of the shared universe books that Chuck has.
Okay.
Um, so
Real quick, would you say that you're strictly science fiction, or are you more like a space opera type?
um, my books are as hard science as I can make them, and still have jump drives and aliens.
Okay.
Um, because I want to go to other worlds. Okay, and if you're really hard science, you're not going to get to other worlds without spending thousands of years in between. And I didn't want to do that. So I have a jump drive, and I assume that there are aliens out there somewhere. So I have them.
Have you included them in your universe and your story yet, or are they
Yes.
just possibly out there?
There's a stinger, a little chapter that's disconnected from the rest of the book in the very first book, Final Assembly, that visits two characters that are um, young, like two boys, basically. Let's just call them two boys. And they have a conversation. They are two of the main alien characters in the book that I'm working on now, the first book of the second series. So it's kind of a little stinger that, hey, this is coming.
Got it. So if there's no aliens, and obviously like this is kind of alluded to in your title alone, but there has to be some sort of fantastic technologies. And so the automated empire, I'm assuming you're going to see AI and automation and stuff like that. Walk me through some of your fantastic technologies.
The biggest thing is starting out on Luna. Luna is a post scarcity society where manufacturing on demand is as easy as asking for something. Um, and everybody has what I call controllers, basically very small computers. They've got at least three. There's the communications controller, which connects them with the wireless networking, and they can hear and speak to other people. There's the display controller, which sits where the nerves for the eyes cross, and it can not only see what you're seeing, but it can project and show images. So augmented reality is just a matter of saying turn it on. And then there's the medical controller that helps manage pain, creates nanites to deliver manufactured drugs and keep you healthy and help repair things. So one of the first things that happens is the main character is boarding a shuttle, and as she gets on the shuttle, she sees her little logo, the I call it a Mechie, floating above her seat. She looks at the seat and the seat glows. She knows right where she needs to go. Little things like that. If somebody is being shown to you virtually, their Mechie will show up above their head. So that's the rule, is that if it's not real, there's an indication that it's not real, because otherwise you can't tell. Other than the fact that she's like 2 inches tall or something like that. But
Do you give in your universe, are your citizens implanted with these at birth, or do they have a coming of age, or is it? I had a guest on recently. We were talking about the capitalistic version of this, where you have to have a certain level of wealth to attain these modifications. How does this work for you?
It works differently in different locations. Later in the series, we'll meet people who can't afford this technology. Luna's different. Everybody can afford it, and everybody gets it as they're forming in the womb. The nanites are busy hooking up and being in there, so it's never intrusive. They're basically born with the technology built in. Other people have to have it implanted later. In at one point, Dawn, the main character, gets some additional tech installed, and you go through that process of how the existing technology makes a pathway and helps it to happen. So yeah, I walked through that.
Okay, interesting. Real quick, let's go back to your publishing for a second.
Mhm.
How did you get hooked up with this? What was your process like? You said that he was referred to you, I believe, but did you have to do a submission and they had to, give you feedback? Like, walk through the process of, hey, I want to get published by this guy, to I am holding a copy of my book in my hand.
Well, it started with writing the book in the first place. I
Yeah.
did hire a an independent editor to help me out because I figured I'm new. Let me make sure I have everything right, which is how the first book got split into two. Um, Long story short, it was
Literally.
actually two stories. Um, but once I had that done, I shopped it around. The original version went to Bain, and they sat on it for a little while, and that came back. They didn't want it. So I made some changes and updates, and made it a better book. And then when um, when I had the opportunity to talk to Chris Kennedy, I talked to him about it, and he said to go ahead and send him the manuscript, and I did that. And about a month later, he got back to me and he said he liked the book and he wanted three books in the series. I had already written the first two, and I was maybe 30% of the way into book three. So I sat down and I finished up book three. I had test readers reading it, and I worked on that for a while. Got that done. Got the three in, and then I got the contract, and he had left it open for the fourth book. So I asked him what my deadline was for the fourth book, and he gave me the deadline, which was the end of this month. And I figured out the number of weeks that I had, and what I needed to do, and I had the time to do it if I maintained a certain pace, which was about 8,000 words a week, which really isn't that much. And I got it done
It's
in
doable.
2 weeks early. So he's already got book four. Um, Needs to be edited and then, you know, set up. But that's it.
Well, you sound like a model author, getting all your stuff in on the deadline. Wow, that's unheard of.
Well, I don't take a deadline I don't think I can meet. But again, it also helps that over the years since 2017 when I started, I've developed the habit and I know what I can do and I know what's too much. I know that if I maintain a certain pace, that eventually I'm going to just have to stop.
Yeah.
And I had that happen, but I've found that sweet spot where I can get it done.
So what is that sweet spot? I'd like to hear that, because some authors, like for me, I have a goal of 500 words a day, which is not an incredible amount, but I also have a full-time job and a toddler, and my wife has certain expectations of me and all that stuff. So
Yeah.
I'm not saying that 500 is too high, too low. I think if I really had to, 1,000 words a day would be kind of a sweet spot for me, unless I was really doing this full time. But like, what's it for you?
Well, if I have to go to work, if I have to go to the office during the day, it's 500. I'll come home
Mhm.
and then after dinner I'll do 500 words. If I'm working from home, I get up early, and before I start work, if I can get 100 words in before I start work, then after work, get back to it, I can do 1,200 a day. And then I can do 2,000 a day on the weekends.
Awesome. That's good to hear. Yeah, a rhythm is super important. I was watching actually another podcast called the Writers Realm podcast. I'll shout them out right now and I'll tag them. I had one of the hosts on there as one of my first guests ever. I think he was like the third or something like that. And they're talking about NaNoWriMo, which starts in 5 days. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that. And they were talking about like getting burned out as opposed to like having a consistent cadence throughout the year. So I think it is very important for authors to have a consistent cadence. And like if you're new and you really just want to try it out for a month and bust out as much as you can, maybe that's great. Or if you have like a book that you really need to get like a great head start on, I think that'd be great. But I think it's better to be consistent than to just burn yourself out over a month and then pull your hair out and look like me if you can't get it done.
I think the advantage of NaNoWriMo is it gets people started, and there's a community of people urging people on, and there's a lot of support there. But the big thing is just to get started. And for me, I don't do NaNoWriMo because I'm going to be writing all month anyway. I know what I'm writing. I'm already working on it. So yeah.
So, all right. Final question before I let you go.
Hmm?
Do you think that all of your talk of AI and modifications and the technology, is this a prophecy and a warning to the readers, or is this just fiction for fun?
There's fun. There's also a warning. Um, like I said, the Luna is a post-scarcity society. You can call it a utopia, almost, to the point where everybody does what they want and it's all wonderful. But then there's a serial killer. And when everything is automated and there's, all AIs in control of various different things, the serial killer has an AI too. And his AI can do things that maybe it shouldn't be allowed to do, but nobody's stopping him. Uh, yeah. So, and then as far as the whole length of the story, the characters are well intentioned, but sometimes they do things that are mistakes, and they're going to pay for them later. So there's that.
Well, that's every character and also a taste of real life, right?
Yeah.
All right. Well, any final comments?
I just hope that somebody else out there likes my book. Like I said, I've written several books since I wrote this one, and I got it on Kindle when it came out. I sat down and actually read it again, and it made me laugh and it made me cry. And I just really hope that somebody else likes it as much as I do.
Yeah. I think, again, going back to what I was saying earlier about authors having like the itch, they have to get what's inside of them out. Like we write what we like to read. And if we've gained inspiration from other books that we've read and kind of modeled our writing after those in some ways, and again, everything will be unique, but if we've got similar styles or similar messages, there will be other people who want to read what you've written. I mean, as long as you've had it edited.
Yes. Yes. As a software developer, I know that a good tester will be able to test and find bugs that I never would. And it's the same with you need to have somebody else look at the book objectively and find your mistakes.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Dennis. Well, thank you very much for coming on, as always.
Yeah.